local economy. And particularly, we're interested at the bit at the bottom, the food and timber category in this model. And again, what the letterbox are doing is shortening up the supply chain, and that's a very important part of a sustainable community, is making those linkages more deliberate and shorter. One of the things that comes up in this work and is talked about a lot by a colleague also at Cardiff University, Kevin Morgan, is the idea of public procurement strategies. And that's something that I might encourage you to consider as you move forward, is the idea of maybe getting LEVACs onto the tables of city councils or town councils for meetings and positioning yourself in a more public way through public venues. And the city of Markham is actually doing some interesting work in this regard, and I can refer you to that if you're interested in getting more information. So there's the idea of shorter supply chains and procurement strategies, and also the idea of health that you touched on as well through your healthy food product, and that Philip and Natasha pointed to too. So that's the context from the EU. I was privileged to work on a report with Karen Landman and a bunch of very motivated grad students throughout last summer. And we produced a report called Models and Best Practices for Building Effective Local Food Systems in Ontario. And I'm going to share just a couple of insights that we made at the beginning of this report that really speaks to some of the things that's going on here. The first is, with respect to the benefits of a sustainable local food system, we're looking at better food access. And the reason that this is important is because, as we know, there have been increasing linkages between things like diabetes and cancer rates. So we know that in Canada, for example, it's estimated that 80% of cardiovascular disease and 90% of type 2 diabetes and 30% of cancers are linked to poor health. And by providing good quality local food to local communities, we help to mitigate those effects. So that's an important part of the formula that you're providing to your community. The second is the idea of a robust food system, and this includes building local linkages. And I think that this is really important when we talk about, in an urban environment, we're talking about social inclusion in a slightly different way, but in a rural context, we're also talking about building these linkages between rural and urban communities. And you do a really good job of that too, because you made those connections into Montreal and Cornwall and those kinds of places. So you're helping to tell that story and build and reinforce those linkages between those two communities. The third point that I'd like to make is the improvement of local supply chains, which are clearly very much focused on. And just to throw a number out to you, there was a report out of the New Economics Foundation out of London, England, and they compared the multiplier effect from food stores that were embedded in the conventional food chain. And they found that those stores only had a multiplier effect of about 1.4, whereas the kind of activities that you're engaged in actually had a multiplier effect of over 2.5. So there's a very big benefit to your local economy of offering these kinds of this kind of infrastructure to individuals in the community. And of course, as Mark mentioned, there's the benefits of shorter food chains through reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And just to wrap up here, what I'd like to do is elaborate on that last point a little bit and focus on the green dimension. There was a report that came out from the UN that spoke about the benefits of developing green economic initiatives as a really important marketing tool as we move forward and we move from the brown to the green economy. And I would just like to put this information out on the table, and this comes from a Suzuki Foundation report that was done in this, I guess the fall now of 2008. And what they do, it's for the green belt, so the numbers wouldn't be necessarily entirely transferable because it was developed to address what's going on in the Toronto region. But when they quantified the environmental goods and services, so that's the benefit that different pieces in the landscape provide to society at large. What they quantified, and I can give you the details of this at another time, or I can refer you to the report, is that pollinator habitat is actually worth over $1,100 per hectare to the general society, and biodiversity was quantified at almost $550 per hectare. And this is interesting because there's a pilot project in Eastern Ontario called the Alternative Land Use Services Project, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not. But what they do is they try to provide compensation to farmers for this kind of environmental goods and services. So farmers are actually being paid for being stewards of the land. So this is maybe something that would be worth considering introducing here in Eastern Ontario if you haven't already made that leap. So just to sum up, first of all, again, commendable that the local business is showing leadership and a capacity for innovation. That's really amazing. It's also wonderful that there's been this extension of public-private partnerships between Queens and the CFDCs and local businesses. And it's also wonderful to see everybody working together to create a more resilient local economy and community. So my kudos to everybody here, and thanks to the Monison Centre, the Queen's School of Business, the Pelosi FDC, the Eastern Ontario CFDC Network, so all the sponsors for today's event. And if you're interested in getting more information from me, there's my email address. And congratulations, you have a wonderful business, and you have done an amazing job, Philip and Natasha, so thank you very much.